It is hopeless for the occasional visitor to try to keep up with Chicago. She outgrows his prophecies faster than he can make them. Chicago was only 46 years old when Mark Twain wrote those words, but it had already grown more than 100-fold, from a small trading post at the mouth of the Chicago River into one of the nation's largest cities, and it wasn't about to stop. Over the next 20 years, it would quadruple in population, amazing the rest of the world with its ability to repeatedly invent itself. And it hasn't stopped. Today, Chicago has become a global city, a thriving center of international trade and commerce, and a place where people of every nationality come to pursue the American dream. Louis Joliet, a Canadian explorer, and the French-born Jesuit Jacques Marquette were the first Europeans to discover the Chicago area in 1673. The Potawatomi Indians arrived soon after, and they gave the name Chicago, or Wild Onions, to the area around Chicago's river mouth. Needless to say, they weren't particularly pleased when settlers arrived in 1803. The newcomers built Fort Dearborn on the river's south bank on marshy ground under what is today's Michigan Avenue Bridge. In 1812, the natives, in cahoots with the British, their allies in the War of 1812, slaughtered 52 settlers fleeing the fort. The massacre took place near what is today Hillary Rodman Clinton Women's Park. During the war, this had been a strategy employed throughout the frontier. The British brought the allegiance of various Indian tribes through trade and other deals, and the Indians paid them back by killing American settlers. The people killed in Chicago had simply waited too long to flee the rising tension and found themselves caught. After the war ended, everyone let bygones be bygones and hugged it out for the sake of the fur trade. Chicago was incorporated as a town in 1833 with a population of 340 people. Within 3 years, land speculation rocked the local real estate market. Lots that sold for $33 in 1829 now went for $100,000. Construction on the Illinois and Michigan Canal, a state project linking the Great Lakes to the Illinois River and thus to the Mississippi River and Atlantic coast, fueled the boom. Swarms of laborers swelled the population to more than 4,100 by 1837, and Chicago became a city. Within 10 years, more than 20,000 people lived in what had become the region's dominant city. The rich Illinois soil supported thousands of farmers, and industrialist Cyrus Hall McCormick moved his harvester factory to the city to serve them. He would soon control one of the Midwest's major fortunes and would have a big mansion on Astor Street. In 1848, the canal opened, shipping flowed through the area, and had a marked economic effect on the city. A great financial institution, the Chicago Board of Trade, opened to handle the sale of grain by Illinois farmers who now had greatly improved access to eastern markets. Railroad construction began soon thereafter, and tracks radiated out from Chicago. The city quickly became the hub of America's freight and passenger trains, a position it would hold for the next 100 years. By the end of the 1850s, immigrants had poured into the city, drawn by jobs on the railroads that served the ever-growing agriculture trade. 20 million bushels of produce were shipped through Chicago annually by then. The population topped 100,000. The city's location, smack dab in the middle of the country, made it a favorite meeting spot, a legacy that continues to this day. Chicago's rail network and the invention of the ice refrigerator car meant that they could be shipped for long distances, satisfying hungry carnivores all the way east to New York and beyond. The stockyards soon became the major meat supplier to the nation, but besides bringing great wealth to a few and jobs to many, the yards were also a source of water pollution. The stockyard waste polluted not only the Chicago River but also Lake Michigan. Flowing into the lake, the fouled waters spoiled the city's source of fresh water and caused cholera and other epidemics that killed thousands. In 1869, the water tower and pumping station built a 2-mile tunnel into Lake Michigan and began bringing water into the city from there. They hoped this setup would skirt the contaminated areas. However, the idea proved resoundingly inadequate, and outbreaks of illness continued. 2 years later, engineers deepened the Illinois and Michigan Canal so they could alter the Chicago River's course and make it flow south, away from the city. Sending waste and sewage down the Reverse River provided relief for Chicago residents and helped ease lake pollution, but it was not a welcome change for those living near what had become the city's drain pipe. The river occasionally still flowed into the lake after heavy rains, and it wasn't permanently reversed until about 1900 when the huge Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal opened. On October 8, 1871, the Chicago Fire started just southwest of downtown. For more than 125 years, legend has it that a cow owned by a certain Mrs. O'Leary kicked over a lantern which ignited some hay, which ignited some lumber, which ignited the whole town. The image of the unlucky heifer was endured despite evidence that the fire was actually the fault of Daniel Pegleg Sullivan, who dropped by the barn on an errand, accidentally starting the fire himself, and then tried to blame it on the cow. The Chicago City Council officially passed a resolution in 1997 absolving the O'Leary family of blame. However, the results of the Chicago fire were devastating. It burned for 3 days, killing 300 people, destroying 18,000 buildings, and leaving 90,000 people homeless. Despite the human tragedy, the fire taught the city some valuable lessons. Namely, don't build everything from wood. Chicago reconstructed with modern materials and created space for new industrial and commercial buildings. The world's best architects poured into the city during the 1880s and 90s to take advantage of the situation. They had a blank canvas to work with, a city giving them lots of money, and a pretty much green light to use their imagination to the fullest. The world's first skyscraper soon popped up in 1885. Several other important buildings also rose during the era, spawning the Chicago style of agriculture. The nationwide enactment of Prohibition in 1920, which was the federal constitutional amendment making alcohol consumption illegal, was destined to meet resistance in Chicago, where voters had gone 6-1 against the law in an advisory referendum. However, few could have predicted how efforts to defy Prohibition would forever mark Chicago's image on a global scale, thanks to a great person named Al Capone. The year 1968 proved an explosive one for Chicago. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, the Chicago's west side exploded in riots and went up in smoke. Whole stretches of the city were laid to waste, and Mayor Daley and the many black politicians in the machine were helpless to stop the violence. Worse yet, the city's hosting of the Democratic National Convention in August degenerated into a fiasco of such proportions that its legacy dogged Chicago for decades. In 1971, financial pressures caused the last of the Chicago stockyards to close, marking the end of one of the city's most infamous enterprises. Factories and steel mills were also shutting down as companies moved to the suburbs or the southern U.S., where taxes and wages were lower. Chicago and much of the Midwest earned the nickname the Rust Belt, describing the area's shrunken economics and rusting factories. Two events happened in the 1970s that were indications of the city's more promising future. The world's tallest building at the time, the Sears Tower, which is actually now called the Willis Tower, opened up in the Loop in 1974, beginning a development trend that would spur the creation of thousands of high-paying white-collar jobs. And in 1975, the Water Tower Place shopping mall brought new life to North Michigan Avenue. The city's first and only female mayor, the colorful Jane Byron, took the helm in 1979. She opened Chicago up to filmmakers, allowing the producers of the Blues Brothers to demolish part of the Daly Center. Movie making remains an important city revenue generator today. Burns' reign was followed by that of Harold Washington, Chicago's first black mayor, in 1983. His legacy was the success of the African-American politicians who followed him. Democrat Carol Moseley Braun, election to the U.S. Senate in 1992, can be credited in part to Washington's political trailblazing. Jesse Jackson Jr. and Barack Obama are a couple of other names that stand out. In 1989, Chicago elected Richard M. Daley, the son of Richard J. Daley, to finish the remaining 2 years of Harold Washington's mayoral term after he died in office. Like his father, Daley had an uncanny instinct for city politics. First, he made nice with state officials who handed over hundreds of millions of public dollars. Among the projects that bore fruit were an O'Hare Airport expansion, a huge addition to the McCormick Place Convention Center, and the reconstruction of Navy Pier. He also reconstructed old, semi-independent bureaucracies such as the Park District and Department of Education, and he entertained the city as well. Despite falling to the third largest U.S. city population-wise, the 1990 census, behind New York and LA, the 90s were a good decade for Chicago. In 1991, the Chicago Bulls won the first of 6 national basketball championships. The 1994 World Cup soccer officials spent millions of dollars spiffing up the city, and thousands of cops underwent sensitivity training on how to deal with protesters. The convention went off like a dream and left Chicagoans believing that they were on a roll. Today, Chicago is a dynamic and culturally diverse city. It's an international center for both business and pleasure and leisure travel, due in part to the city's transportation accessibility, a thriving business economy, and world-class hotels, restaurants, shopping, and attractions. If you ever have a chance to visit Chicago, I highly recommend it.